No more weeping and a wailing. Thank you so much. Very inspirational. And if you get there before I do, tell them I'm coming too. It's beautiful. I love hearing that gospel music. Thank you for blessing with us. And we didn't jump into big hurrahs and applause after the offertory anthem either, but we were shouting amen in our hearts. Thank you for that. Friends, I want to talk to you today about the peace, the joy, and the true hope of faith. I want to talk to you about the peace, the joy, and the hope of entrusting your life to God, of putting your cares, putting your worries, putting your life into God's hands. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about surrendering your own personal gifts, your own abilities, your own talents. In fact, I believe it's when you put your life into the hands of God that your own personal abilities, gifts, and talents find new meaning and purpose. I believe it's when you put your life into the hands of God that your gifts, your abilities, and talents are empowered. So don't worry that I'm asking you to give up who you are and what you can do to bring change in this world and in your life. In fact, the reason I'm talking to you today about putting your life back into the hands of God is because I want to see those talents and abilities and gifts come to life in your lives so that you can start to bring change in your own personal lives, in this city and in this world. So I want to talk to you about putting your life into God's hands. Now, I don't know about you, as a kid, I found it really easy to put my life into God's hands. Never questioned it. As long as my life was in God's hands, life was good. I felt pretty secure. I felt pretty safe. I had that peace as a child. I had that joy. I had that hope as a child. Now, I remember as a kid going to visit my grandparents every summer, and an awful lot on the weekends. Now, some of you may remember that my grandparents owned a funeral home in Petrolia, Ontario. Growing up in that house, I had an incredible, rich childhood. I was blessed because of my experiences with my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles who married into the family, my parents, my brothers, in that funeral home. A lot of people would say, Mark, isn't it kind of weird spending all that time in a funeral home? Isn't it kind of creepy? Well, sometimes. But let me tell you, life is never more real when you spend as much time that close to death. When death keeps coming to confront you day in and day out, when people's real human grieving and suffering comes through the front door of your grandparents' home, and you see how your grandparents deal with it and are carefully loving their neighbors and their friends through that time of grief, life gets really real at that point. I experienced so much joy and laughter and love in that home. I experienced those same things in my own family, but never did it seem quite as rich as it did in my grandparents' funeral home. And I think my family, if I talked to them about it today, they would agree that we had many, many rich experiences of love and joy and even humor in that family. Now, there was one time, though, one time that happened every day in their funeral home where I didn't feel quite as joy-filled. It was nighttime. Night times in a funeral home are nerve-wracking times, especially for a kid. Now, when we came and stayed at my grandparents' place, my grandparents often slept on the fold-out couch out in the living room, and my brothers and I got their bedroom because there was a double bed and a couch in their bedroom, and two of us got stuck with each other, and the third lucky brother got the couch, usually the one who could, outmaneuver the other two. But I do remember as a kid praying that I could go to sleep before my parents went to bed or my grandparents went to bed, because I hated to be awake alone at night in the funeral home. You see, my grandparents' bedroom, the bedroom I slept in when I stayed, you could just look out the doorway to the stairwell that led down to the main floor of the funeral home, where bodies were carefully and lovingly presented in caskets and surrounded by sprays of flowers. And when you're a kid and you're looking down the stairwell, you're thinking, Grandma and Grandpa, why didn't you should put a door there? You need to lock that door every night so your grandson can sleep at night. Every night I'd keep an eye on that stairwell going down to where the bodies were laid out for wakes and funerals, and one floor below that where the embalming room was. So every night I'd pray that I could get to sleep before everyone else, because you don't want to be awake in a house like that when everyone else is asleep, because everybody knows that if somebody's going to be lifted from out of a casket and come zombie-like up the stairs, he's going to snatch the one little kid who's still awake. You know that, I know that. And so I'd pray that I could get to sleep. Now, I, of course, never confessed that to my brothers. You never would say, oh man, was I ever scared last night? Because you have older brothers. Those of you who have older siblings know what happened. You know what's going to happen. You tell your older siblings, and they're not only going to tease you mercilessly, they're going to find new ways to scare you. And you're sure not going to go to mom and dad and say, oh, I was so scared, can I sleep with you? Because, of course, it's the same end result. Your brothers are going to find out and say, you had to sleep with mom and dad last night. Let's scare them some more tonight. The way I found to deal with my anxiety, my fear of sleeping that close to death, was a picture that hung on my grandparents' bedroom wall. It was a picture that I bet you almost everyone in this room has seen at one time or another. It's the picture of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Do you remember? Jesus has a number of sheep around his feet. And he has a shepherd's crook maybe in one hand, and his other hand he's holding a little lamb or a sheep in his arm. I'm a city kid. I don't know the difference between a lamb and a sheep. All I knew was that Jesus was caring for these ones who were so vulnerable, those that were weak and needed caring for. As a child, I knew fully and completely that Jesus was the Good Shepherd. And so while one eye might have been on that stairwell leading to death, the other eye was on Jesus. The other eye was on Jesus, the Good Shepherd. I knew that if I put my life in his hands, he would care for me the way he cared for the little sheep in that picture. I knew it was about putting your life in the hands of God. I bet you did too. As a child, you knew almost without question if your life was in God's hands. If you were like me, you grew up in the church, you probably sang songs about it. Remember? He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. And as kids, we just accepted that without question. I know I did. And when we got a little older, into the late 60s, early 70s, I don't know if you remember this song. I think it was written by a guy from Prince Edward Island. It was a little more rock, and it went like this. Put your hand in the hand of the man who calms the waters. Put your hands in the hands of the man who stills the sea. Take a look at yourself and you can look at others differently by putting your hands in the hand of the man from Galilee. Do you remember that song? Put your hand, oh God. I was up here singing by myself. I wasn't sure.